Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on this Thursday evening. Welcome to a virtual presentation with land use professor Tom Daniels from the University of Pennsylvania. He has done a great study on behalf of Napa County and our residents, but the JLD Ag Fund reached out to him earlier. Actually, at this stage, before the whole COVID pandemic started, we had intended for this presentation to happen in March of last year, but then things changed, and then we had intended for it to happen again in October of last year, and then of course with some fires, things changed again, but we're really thrilled to be here tonight, and we thank you very, very much for your presentation. We know there are many your participation. I say there are many challenges that our community is facing, the greater community for that matter, and there are many priorities to consider. But one of them is this issue here in Napa County regarding our interest in preserving agricultural lands long term, but at the same time providing housing, particularly affordable housing for our residents and our workforce. And so this was a thought that came out of our board deliberations that we wanted to explore more thoroughly. And we're really thrilled with the work that Tom has done, and encourage everyone to read through the material. Tonight we'll have a virtual presentation of it. To give you a little background on the JLD Ag Fund, many of you may be aware that my father was Jack Davies. He was an advocate, one of the leading advocates of the agricultural preserve going back to 68. At the time of his passing in 98, we were encouraged, my family was, to establish a foundation to continue some of the work that he was involved with regards to ag land preservation. And so we have pursued ag education efforts here in Napa County, but also we have pursued some research efforts that would help us in our effort to preserve ag lands as time goes along and as our county moves forward. This study really looks head on at this challenge of providing housing relative to our interest in preserving agricultural lands. We believe that we can do both things successfully. And I really, again, wanted to thank Tom for the work that he has done to put this presentation together this evening. But more importantly, the body of work that he has done in writing this report for us. Many ideas coming from other parts of the country that could be employed. We're doing a great job here in Napa County, obviously preserving agricultural land. We want to continue to do that going forward. So I will introduce Sandy Ellis, who is the Executive Director of the California Ag Commissioners and Sealers Association, also a longtime board member with us on the JLD Ag Fund. Thank you, Sandy, for your effort on this project, and I'll turn it over to you.
There, finally found the unmute button. Hello, everyone. As you said, I'm Sandy Ellis, and board member with the Jack L. Davies Ag Land Preservation Fund for 20 years. So to say that I am passionate about farmland protection would not be a stretch. To say that I am passionate about sustainability principles, healthy communities, and building affordable housing is also very true. That it is a very, very important goal for us in our community. I want to acknowledge everybody who is attending tonight. We had 80-some people sign up. It looks like we've got about 50 signed on for the seminar thus far. The list of attendees, I'm not quite sure if you see all the participants, but it includes an incredible amount of expertise. And we have representatives from government, we have elected officials, appointed officials, we have folks from the nonprofit world, folks from the building industry, folks from the wine industry, And again, all of you are participating as concerned citizens and people who care about our valley. Just by showing up, you're going to be part of the solution of the conundrum that we face as we try and build an adequate supply of affordable housing, but do so within the confines of our urban areas of the county. Our main purpose tonight is, of course, to hear from Dr. Tom Daniels, whose report was generated to meet our community's needs of building that housing that we need in our urban core. Everyone deserves the right to housing. Every generation also deserves the right to inherit healthy agricultural lands that are passed down as an irreplaceable resource from generation to generation. The goals of farmland protection and affordable housing are indeed compatible. Again, this is a mantra that we've been repeating over and over, if you do so within the urban core, and that is our challenge. This urban-centered growth makes even more sense when we talk about and think about the impact on climate change. Land use transportation linkages, walkable and bikeable communities, building housing in the urban core where services exist already and infrastructure exists, redeveloping underdeveloped lands within the urban core. Those are all tried and true metrics for sustainable development. Over the years, the Jack Davies Fund has engaged in a number of research and educational projects. Most of the research projects were spearheaded by Volker Isola, past board member, and many of you remember him as the Lion of Land Use of Napa County. And for those of you who knew Volker, you know where the descriptor lion originated from. So tonight's session is keeping Volker's spirit and dedication to land preservation alive, and his love for sustainable and wise land use planning. With the Napa City General Plan update well underway, new regional housing needs allocation numbers handed down by the State Housing and Community Development and by ABAG, and with new leadership at the Napa Valley Community Housing nonprofit, it's an auspicious time to hold this event. We view this evening's program as an incubator of ideas, a call for new partnerships, and a stronger focus on our community to meet our housing needs, again, with city-centered growth. Dr. Tom Daniels is the program director of the Land Use and Environmental Planning Department at the University of Pennsylvania, tenured professor since 2003, author of an astonishing list of articles and academic papers related to best practices in land use, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and growth management. He was also a Fulbright Scholar, director of the Lancaster County Ag Preserve, and is recognized as one of our nation's foremost academic planners. Plus, his favorite wine is Cabernet Sauvignon. What's not to like about that? Tom's 100-page report is a delightful read for all of you policy wonks out there, and I encourage you to read all of it. For those of you without the luxury of time, Tom created a succinct 2-page executive summary. Both of those are available at the JLD website. So if you haven't had a chance to read those documents, we would encourage you to do so. Tonight, we have disabled the chat function for our guests to use, but the Q&A is live. So as you listen to Tom's report, please add your questions to the Q&A forum, and I will moderate the dialogue after Tom's presentation. So with that, it's showtime. The floor, or should I say the webcam, is yours, Tom.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining in today. And as Hugh mentioned, this is the third time we've tried to schedule my presentation, and I'm very sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. I want you to know that I'm no stranger to the Bay Area. My brother and his family live in San Francisco. My middle son lives in San Francisco, and my oldest son and his family live in Marin County. And perhaps even more important, I'm a lifelong San Francisco Giants fan, and I've been to Oracle Park many times. This presentation actually started back in 2017 when I had a subscription to the Wine Spectator, and they did an excellent issue on Napa Valley. And I did a little research, and I found that there had been no academic articles done on the Ag Preserve, so I did one. And when I received notice that my article had been selected to celebrate, I popped open a bottle of Stag's Leap Cabernet Sauvignon. Sandy Ellis saw my article, and I then got together with the JL Davies Fund and came up with a study that you can read after tonight's presentation. I want to be clear that I recognize that this is your land and your county, and these are decisions that you need to make about the future of Napa County. I do hope that my suggestions are useful to you, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. There. Napa County today has a population of about 140,000 people. The county covers a little more than 500,000 acres. And as you all know, this is the nation's premier wine producing region with more than 400 wineries. The median house price in the county is about $700,000. And the median household income is about $88,000, which is a bit more than the national median income of about $60,000. Napa, of course, is a very special place, and keeping it that way is always a challenge. In October of 2017, my oldest son and I were visiting the county the day before the fires broke out, and I looked at my cell phone and the humidity was 18%. It was absolutely bone dry, and the fires were horrific, as you well know. And it really, tugged at my heart, and I speak for a lot of people, I think, when I say this. We were all really shocked to see the fires last year and the devastation that was done in the county as well. So that, together with the COVID crisis that's hit all of us, I'm certainly hoping that you were able to bounce back in this new year. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about three main issues. I'm going to talk about agricultural land preservation. Then I'm going to talk about annexation, or how cities expand by adding county land to within their boundaries. And I'm also going to talk about affordable housing. I'm going to draw on some examples from California, as well as other parts of the United States. And I hope you find these examples useful for Napa County. Next slide, please. Today, there are more than 7.6 million people living in the 9 Bay Area counties. And the expectation is that there will be 9.3 million people by 2040. So I think the key questions are, first, how to maintain and preserve agricultural land, which is the foundation of the Napa County economy and really the rural quality of life that you enjoy here. And second, where, when, how far, and whether to expand municipalities by annexing unincorporated county land. And third, how to provide adequate affordable housing for all income groups. Next slide, please. As Hugh mentioned, Napa County has been a national leader in protecting agricultural land. The Agricultural Preserve, created in 1968, now covers about 32,000 acres, and development is limited to one house per 40 acres. There's also very restrictive zoning of just one house per 160 acres in the agricultural watershed district on more than 400,000 acres. Next slide, please. Here on the left is the land use map of the county, and you can see the agricultural preserve between Napa, the city of Napa, and St. Helena in particular, as well as moving over towards Lake Berryessa, where you see more of the agricultural watershed. Then on the right, you have the county zoning map, again highlighting the ag preserve between Napa City and St. Helena, as well as the ag watershed. Next slide, please. This is a photo I took, part of the agricultural preserve looking west along Highway 29. Really a stunning landscape. Next slide, please. So preserving land costs money, and it also requires the voluntary participation of landowners. You can't force landowners to preserve their land. They have to see it as something they really want to do. Last year and in 2016, you had the Napa County Parks and Open Space District sales tax initiatives, which narrowly failed, and my recommendation would be to try again. Those initiatives would have raised a 0.25% sales tax that would raise about an estimated $9 million for buying park space, as well as preserving some agricultural land. I have to mention that your neighbor in Sonoma County has such a tax that the voters there approved in 1990 and reapproved I think in 2006. And that 1/4 cent sales tax over the last 30 years has raised over $400 million and resulted in the preservation of about 120,000 acres in Sonoma County. So some other sources of funding for agricultural land preservation, probably the best source right now is the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which provides up to 50% matching funds for the purchase of conservation easements to agricultural land. There's also a California Farm Conservancy program that began in 1995 that also makes grants to local governments and land trusts for the preservation of agricultural land. More recently, California created the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, which again makes grants to local governments and land trusts for buying conservation easements to agricultural land. And the Land Trust of Napa County has been able to get some of this money. And this money comes from the state's cap and trade program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another source is private funds or foundations. For example, the Land Trust of Napa County has been able to get funding from the Gordon Moore Foundation, Intel money, to do some preservation work here in the county. And one of the suggestions I have is creating a cooperative agreement between the Napa County Regional Park and Open Space District and the Land Trust of Napa County to work on land preservation projects. And this is based on personal experience I have here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where I live. And for 9 years in the 1990s, I managed the county's farmland preservation program. And one of the first things that I did was enter into a cooperative agreement between the county and the private Lancaster Farmland Trust. And this cooperative agreement has really worked very, very well for us. Our two organizations together have now preserved over 111,000 acres of agricultural land, or more agricultural land than any other county in the United States. So I'm a very firm believer in the strength of public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. The Land Trust of Napa County has really been quite successful. They have permanently preserved over 85,000 acres, about 16% of the county. And you can see the areas in purple over on the left. And they have done this preservation through purchasing and receiving donations of conservation easements, what we also refer to as development rights. So the preserved land includes open space for public access and about 15,000 acres of private agricultural lands, which are, you can't just go on that land and have a picnic. It's private working agricultural land. Next slide, please. Annexation. Again, this is the process by which a municipality would add county land to within its boundaries to expand the municipality. In 1990, Napa County voters passed Measure J, which gave voters the control over rezoning of land in the agricultural preserve or the agricultural watershed. And based on my research, 7 of 15 proposals have been approved so far, so roughly 50-50. In 2008, voters of the county passed Measure P, which extended Measure J to 2058 and added the following language to provide for housing. Where necessary to comply with applicable state law governing the provision of housing, the Board of County Supervisors may redesignate land designated as agriculture, watershed, and open space, or agricultural resource on the land use map without a vote of the people. So ultimately, the county supervisors have the power to rezone land for housing if there is indeed a recognized housing shortage. Next slide, please. This is a map of areas in the county in red that are not subject to Measure J and could be developed. Next slide, please. So measures J and P do not apply to land that cities annex from the agricultural zones. Okay, so annexation certainly can continue to happen by the cities. 2 of the county's 5 municipalities, the city of American Canyon and the city of Napa, have adopted growth boundaries, what they call rural-urban limit lines. The other 3 municipalities, Yountville, St. Helena, and Calistoga, may expand beyond their existing city limits without a public vote. Next slide, please. California, as you know, is a little different because they have local agency formation commissions, which are separate units of government in effect. And you have one, of course, here in Napa County, and they have control over decisions about annexation as well as additions to what are called spheres of influence by cities, which is land that could be annexed at some future date. So far, relatively little agricultural land has been annexed over the years or placed in spheres of influence. One of the things that I suggest the LAFCO take a look at is what's called a mitigation requirement. And Contra Costa County has such a requirement from its LAFCO. The mitigation could require the owners or developers to preserve at least 1 acre of like quality agricultural land for each acre of agricultural land that's annexed and then developed. Next slide, please. So here's sort of some thoughts about successful strategies. First, emphasize redevelopment and infill within existing communities first before looking at annexation. And second, all municipalities in the county should implement rural-urban limit lines, and the expansion of these lines should be subject to a public vote. I think in interests of transparency, that's probably a good strategy. And then third, consider annexation an option of last resort. That means won't never use it, but after you've tried everything else. You do have one annexation that I know of in the works, the Napa Pipe annexation, and I think this is actually a very good example of annexation. It's an old brownfield site between the city of Napa and the city of American Canyon. The proposal right now is to develop it as mixed use, commercial and residential. And the proposal that I've seen would provide about 100 plus units of affordable housing, which would be very helpful. Next slide, please. Housing. Affordable housing and agricultural land preservation are really two sides of the same coin. And I want to share with you what I think is a very good example of this. I originally grew up in Vermont. I still have family there. I still go back to visit every now and then. And in 1987, Vermont created something called the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. They wanted to preserve land, but they recognized that if they did preserve land, it could cause shortages of available land that could push up housing prices and really price locals out of the market. So they created the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to work on both affordable housing and land conservation. And over the years, they've created more than 12,000 units of affordable housing, and they've preserved more than 160,000 acres of agricultural land and open space. And if you go to Vermont, it really is still looks in many ways like the 19th century. California, of course, has the Regional Housing Need Allocation Goals, or the RHNA program. And the Bay Area counties have really struggled to meet their housing goals for low income, moderate income, or what's also called workforce housing, as well as market rate housing. To meet the affordable housing needs, again, I want to emphasize partnerships between the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. And one of my suggestions would be creating a nonprofit Napa County Housing Trust to really help combine these efforts. Your neighbor in Sonoma County has a housing trust. They've had one since 2002. And Santa Clara County, at the other end of the bay, created the Silicon Valley Housing Trust, which has been really quite successful in providing affordable housing. Municipalities really should review their zoning ordinances to identify opportunities for housing and other infill projects. One of the techniques that's gained a lot of popularity in recent years is called inclusionary zoning. So for example, if a developer built more than 10 units of housing, 15 or 20% of those units would have to be reserved for low and moderate income housing. Next slide, please. This is not in my report, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it really emphasizes the challenge that Napa County has been put in. And this is an excerpt from a letter from the Board of Supervisors Chair, Diane Dillon, and the Mayor of the City of Napa, Jill Tetchell, to the Association of Bay Area Governments. And they say, there has been a greater emphasis on using RHNA as means for establishing social equity than for a balanced and sound land use plan as required by Senate Bill 375, which of course is the climate change bill and the connection between land use and transportation, and the objectives of Government Code Section 65584D, which include protecting environmental and agricultural resources and encouraging efficient development patterns. So on the one hand, you want to provide more affordable housing. On the other hand, you want to protect your environmental and agricultural resources. And this is certainly a challenge to do at the same time. Next slide, please. This is a slide that my oldest son put together for a presentation that he did at the American Planning Association conference in San Francisco 2 years ago. And he worked for a company called EAP based out of San Rafael that finances low-income housing. And for households that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, they are considered cost burdened. Nationally, about a third of all households are cost burdened. You can see here in Napa, it's a little over 50%. Next slide, please. So this is a Stonebridge in St. Helena that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is a project my son's company helped finance. And he gave me the grand tour, and it really is quite nice. A very nice example of multifamily housing on a human scale that really fits in, I think, very, very well. And today it is managed by the Napa Valley Community Housing, which has also built 600 plus units of affordable housing in the county, and also rehabbed about 200 plus units in the county, and now manages about 15 properties throughout the county. One other thing that I just want to mention with the housing that frankly I found impressive was I think it was in 2018, the municipalities increased the transient occupancy tax by 1% to raise around $4 million for affordable housing. That's really, I think, quite impressive. Next slide, please. So here are some of the lessons learned on affordable housing. I think it does have to be a much higher priority for planners, cities, and the county. It's a problem throughout the United States. There's no question about it. The state of California is obviously promoting regional fair share housing policies through RHNA, and meeting those goals is a challenge for every county. Private developers will not be able to create enough affordable housing on their own. I think nonprofits are important providers and managers, and again, I think the public sector coming up with funding such as the TOT tax is important as well. Techniques like inclusionary zoning, or you also have what are called accessory dwelling unit zoning here in the county, which is certainly helpful for adding garage apartments or cottages in the backyard. Can be part of the solution, but not really a silver bullet panacea. Next slide, please. So for final thoughts, I want to point out that Napa County, the municipalities, and the LAFCO are really doing a lot of things well. And the suggestions that I have here are really meant to help you or add to the good efforts that you already have underway. First of all is really maintaining the agricultural land and preserving it. This, of course, takes time, it takes money, and as I said, takes interest from the landowners. But if you can create, a public-private partnership, it really can help you increase your funding, and your chances of success are going to be much higher. Second, emphasize affordable housing, use partnerships again, and annexation really should be looked at as the last resort. Again, you can find my report at the website below. Again, I want to thank you very much for attending this evening, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tom. We're now in the Q&A part of our evening, and we have some questions posted already. Before I start with the first question, I just want to acknowledge the response from Lena with the Land Trust, saying that the Land Trust in the Napa County Parks and Open Space District does have an operating agreement, a formal operating agreement. I know that they have worked on a number of projects together. My understanding, or my misunderstanding, was that they were project specific, whether it was working on an expansion of Robert Louis Stevenson State Park or purchase of habitat land in eastern part of the county, etc. But Lena says that they do have a formal a cooperative agreement. So that's one thing checked off our list already. And that's good news indeed. So let's launch into the question from Amanda. And you can ask these questions to get it more personal and interactive. I can read them, but Wako, if you want to unmute Amanda, she can ask the question herself.
Amanda,
Hi.
unmuted.
Thank you for letting me jump on. I just had a quick question. In the presentation, you mentioned conservation and preservation kind of interchangeably, but I know in kind of the world of environmental studies, those are two very different things. Was that kind of an intentional thing, or do you have any opinions of preservation versus conservation in Napa County?
Tom, you're muted. There we go.
Thank you for that question. Usually the two terms are conservation and preservation are used interchangeably. In both cases, they really do involve placing a permanent conservation easement on a property. And conservation usually implies more of the practices that will also be used on the property to maintain the productivity of the property over time. But really, conservation and preservation are often used interchangeably.
All right.
So the idea is to limit the use of the land to agriculture and open space.
Next question would be from Erica Sklar. Is Erica unmuted?
Erica, you're free to speak.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was just, I know that St. Helena has a rural urban limit line, but maybe that is somehow different. It still allows for expansion without a vote. I just wanted you to clarify, because I thought we already had one up there.
I didn't find that in my research, and the two that do require a public vote are the city of Napa and the city of American Canyon.
Thank you.
But you might want to talk to the people in St. Helena to confirm that.
Okay.
St. Helena is an unusual circumstance, and I think it would be very beneficial to have the 5 cities, the county, and LAFCO talk generally about urban limit lines, sphere of influences, and city limits in the context of land preservation and building housing and housing opportunity sites before an annexation proposal comes formally to LAFCO. In the case of St. Helena, the sphere of influence, the area that can be, the city limit can logically be expanded to, is an odd boundary, and the city limit is actually larger. So St. Helena already has a very expansive set of properties and a boundary line, and in their general plan, they say that they've drawn their city limit, which includes a lot of protected lands by the city's zoning, because they want to protect those lands. So it's a little bit of a flip side, and it would be a really productive dialogue, I think, to review that collectively as in a constructive dialogue with parties in the county. Yountville is also a little interesting because they are already built out and they do not have expansion plans. And Calistoga, as Tom said, does not have an urban limit line. All 9 cities in Sonoma County have urban limit or urban growth boundaries, synonymous terms, that are locked in. And so that's, and it took probably 10 years for all of those 9 cities to launch their urban growth boundaries with a vote of the people.
We have about 16 minutes left on our schedule and about 8 questions.
Okay, so let's go on to Kelly Duckhorn's question.
Free to speak, Kelly.
I see her.
Hi, hello, good evening. I just have a quick question about the pressure on the ag preserve lands given the current property insurance crisis that we are all experiencing. I'm a resident of Angwin, and we are wholly uninsurable up here for all things fire. So it appears to me, just from a pure economics, supply demand perspective, that pressure to expand into the WUI or some of these ag preserved spaces may be curtailed just by this specific disability to or inability to obtain property insurance.
That certainly can be the case. And you know, the fire insurance is often tied to, access, not just to a fire department, but certainly, water lines. I think you have a valid point.
All right, next question, Joelle Gallagher. It's a question and a comment.
Go ahead, Joelle. Try again.
Hi, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I am a representative from the Napa Housing Coalition. We're advocates for housing that's affordable throughout Napa County. And we have talked quite a bit about a regional entity. We know that from our research that cities and counties throughout the country that have had success with building housing that is affordable tend to have a regional body of some kind that has authority. So just wanted to know what your experience might be with that and how we can best support that development of something like that in Napa County.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point that you raise. One of the most successful housing organizations is actually headquartered in my hometown of Burlington, Vermont, called the Champlain Housing Trust. And it's really what you would refer to as a community land trust. They actually will acquire land and houses and then turn around and, either rent or actually sell the house to somebody. But if somebody buys the house, they don't own the ground, they only own the house. And they're certainly limited in terms of what capital gains they can get off, the eventual sale of the house. But the Champlain Housing Trust has been able to create about 2,200 units of affordable housing in a market that really is not quite as hot as Napa County, but still for the Northeast is actually pretty high. Again, what I mentioned earlier about a housing trust, I think may be appropriate for Napa County.
Thank you. Next question, Marjorie Moeller.
Go right ahead, Marjorie.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I think this is a very interesting conversation, but I am a firm believer in the Ag Reserve. I think it's extremely important for our economy here in the Napa Valley. I also am chair of Napa County LAFCO and a board member on Cal LAFCO. So I also support that annexation is not the first place we go. However, this is a multifactorial issue because we have increased RENA numbers. We also have increased fires, and the fire zones are, it's a little complicated because CAL FIRE has zones. There's our regional fire departments have zones. They're now dividing up these zones of fire into low, medium, high, and extra high risk. So it's a lot of pieces that really need to kind of come together for a solution. So how do we really go about this? I think we really need a more global countywide discussion, and just saying we can, put more housing in the municipalities. We also have our general plans, and our general plans are driven a lot by what our residents want. And I've heard, just build up. Well, that's not what the people want. So I think there's a lot of different pieces that have to kind of go into this equation. So my thought is, do we really have how do we begin a countywide discussion? We just can't be, the little cities versus the county. We really have to realize that this is a global discussion. How do we start that discussion?
I think you're going to get into this in a few more minutes when the board of the JL Davies funds talks about next steps. But I'd suggest that you're going to have county wide meetings. It's more than just a couple hours on a Thursday afternoon to wrestle with these issues. But you raise, I think, some very important points. One of the things that came to mind when I was looking at the watershed area in particular was, as bad as the devastation has been in Napa, if you compare that to Southern California, where they've had fires and they haven't had, limits or much in the way of limits of people living out in the countryside, they've ended up losing a lot more homes in the process. So, part of what you're getting at is defensible space, as well as, the need for more housing. And so I agree with you. I think this is a much broader discussion than what we can get into just this evening.
All right, next question, Mary Stephenson.
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, this is Mary Stevenson from our town, St. Helena. Am I on?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
I have two comments. One is that it seems to me that as we try to develop this countywide organization, we should also start looking at what is a sustainable long-term funding source for housing. And I think one of the main things that we could look at is transfer tax, which is some people are for that and some people against it, but I think we need to have a financing discussion along with the planning organization discussion. And the second comment I'd like to make is that Deer Park, which lost over 300 homes in the latest fire, is really the working class suburb of St. Helena and Calistoga as well. And it is in the fire zone, and it does have a lot of issues with infrastructure. But it seems to me that the county-wide, we need to think big on how to reconfigure Deer Park to provide housing for Up Valley working families. And it would be really out of the box thinking to make that happen. Thank you.
I agree. You know, what I said about affordable housing and farmland preservation being this same two sides of the same coin, you know, you really want dedicated funding for both. And that way you can actually do some long-term planning. So thank you for that comment.
Great. Barry Christensen, next question.
Hi, Sandy. Okay, so state law requires 2/3 support for fully funding the open space district. As you mentioned, it was narrowly defeated 2 or 3 times now, going all the way back to the year 2000. How do you suggest gaining stronger support? And especially from leading industry groups, some supported it while others were silent on the issue.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's you know, it's tough in California because you have that 2/3 requirement, which you don't have in some other states. I think what's important is to point out the benefits to everyone of land preservation. The initiatives that have been proposed are not just for preserving agricultural land. They're also for you know, expanding park space, which everybody can enjoy. But you know, if you preserve agricultural land, it helps the local economy. It maintains the view shed, which is also important for people's enjoyment of the county, as well as, you know, attracting tourists. Where I live in Lancaster, we're very similar, is that we have a thriving agricultural industry that's really the basis of our tourist industry. We have very strong support from our public for farmland preservation because they see it as, you know, essential for their overall quality of life. And you know, again, I think you just need to emphasize those points and hopefully build a, you know, even broader coalition next time and get the initiative passed.
Mary had a second question, and I'm noticing that we're getting close to time, so just want to keep an eye on that.
Right, and this might be a good time to mention our ability to extend the session. We had planned for 1 hour, not being sure how many people would attend or how much dialogue and Q&A there would be, but we have a significant queue of excellent questions, so we are able to keep going for another 15 minutes beyond our 6:30 projected stop. So let's plan to keep going through the questions. If you have to sign off because you have plans and need to be with your family or move on to something else this evening, feel free to do so, but we will keep the session live for at least another 15 minutes. It's a really good dialogue, really great suggestions and thoughts, and we're hoping, we don't have, as a board and the sponsors of this evening, we don't have an intended outcome. We don't have the path forward, but gathering all your comments collectively, I think we want to end the evening with some sense of what we can do to move the momentum and move the ball forward. So let's go to Ann Cottrell for the next question.
You're free to speak, Ann.
Waco, it looks like she's still muted.
She can unmute her. I'm asking her to unmute herself.
There we go. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
It's okay.
Thank you, Professor Daniels. This has been a great presentation. My question was if you could just give us any more feedback on some details of the process or the timeline in the Vermont setting, where I'm wondering how some of the steps that it took to get people to rally around the linkage between affordable housing and the municipalities and the benefits that accrue to the open space and ag land. And also if you could talk about, because one question I have is, did they form that organization and then take years to fundraise, or did they start with some funds and then create it? So any specifics you could talk about there?
Sure. Well, it's actually a state agency that was created, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So it does receive funding from the state of Vermont as a line item in the governor's budget each year. But they've been very successful in bringing in a lot of funding from the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. So basically half of their land preservation projects are funded by the federal government. It's worked very well. They also have a cooperative agreement with the Vermont Land Trust. So again, for land preservation, it's a public-private effort. And they also work with local housing organizations on making grants to local housing organizations for rehabbing and building affordable housing. So, it helps to have, the targeted state money, but again, because they do have, that base of money for land preservation, they're able to leverage it with the federal money, which is very attractive. But the real reason they created the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, again, was, that the housing people were really concerned that the land preservation people were going to, drive up housing prices and price a lot of people out of the market. And so it was it made for a very powerful coalition, and it's been able to withstand any, attempts by any governors or legislators to cut its funding. So that's the kind of coalition that, you may want to look at, in Napa when you go for hopefully another, sales tax initiative for land preservation. If there's a connection also to affordable housing, I think that would be very powerful.
All right, Janet, could you put the slide up about the regional housing needs allocation numbers, because we have the next question referring to that. So Brendan, you're up next with your comment question. Brendan Freeman.
Well, hello, everybody. I didn't realize I was going to be asking this question verbally, but basically my question relates to the regional housing needs allocations, which Supervisor Gregory commented on in the Q&A chat. And Supervisor Gregory pointed out that there are going to be some serious challenges, well, not just now, but in the future, balancing the need for housing with the need to preserve agricultural land. And both of these issues are LAFCO issues that we take very seriously, both the need to accommodate logical and orderly city growth to accommodate housing, and also the need to preserve agricultural land. And so up until now, LAFCO has been left out of the regional housing needs allocation conversation, but I was just putting it out there that maybe LAFCO should be invited to the table and represented in these conversations. So thank you for the opportunity and great presentation.
Brendan, thank you for coming. And I couldn't agree with you more. LAFCO, I think, plays a very important role in in the whole annexation process, as you well know, and really you should be part of the conversation.
And I do see Ryan's comment. Ryan Gregory, would you like to comment on this issue and how you see the county working with the cities to meet these regional housing needs allocations? I'm not positive if they're final. I think ABAG has voted several times to endorse these numbers. I don't know if they're final. I know the county was and the cities were trying to push back on these. Maybe you could give us a little bit of your insight.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, the ABAG meets next week and is most certainly to bless these numbers we received that have been sort of draft. We still all reserve the right to appeal these numbers, and the county's thinking about that because we feel they're overly inflated in a lot of different ways. But barring that, we're stuck with a 500% increase in what the county has to come up with. So, and just to remind everybody that our housing elements are due January 30th, 2023. That sounds like a long time, but with all the work ahead of us and the EIR that has to be done for it, there's not much time left. So we're getting to work. And I just wanted to remind everybody, we set up a RHNA subregion between the cities of American Canyon, Napa, the town of Yountville, and the county of Napa. Cities of Calistoga and St. Helena declined to be a part of it. And the point of the group was to work together on our housing elements instead of in 4 different silos. So you'll hear soon that the structure of that might change a little bit, but us 4 jurisdictions are committed to working together on our housing elements instead of separately. So we have an ad hoc of two electeds from each of those jurisdictions that have been meeting for several months now. So there is a regional coordination going on. I just wanted to reassure everybody. It's going to morph and change along the way as we go, but we realize we're all, in this together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we're hearing a repetitive theme about partnerships, collaboration, cooperation, and needing, as Marjorie said earlier, needing to have a countywide conversation. So let's jump back to Chris Benz. Chris?
I'm looking for her here. She may have left the meeting.
Oh, let's see.
Can you comment on any concerns about that climate change and warming temps may cause growers to leave Napa Valley, Tom?
I think you have some people in the audience who probably have a bit more experience than I do with that question. But if temperatures keep getting warmer and drier, that certainly can be a challenge for the growers.
Mary Stevenson has raised her hand, so I'm going to see if she has a comment on this. You're free to speak, Mary.
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. Thank you.
Hugh has his hand up, Waco.
Hugh should be able to unmute himself.
He can't.
No, I'm good. Interesting question. That's one that as a vintner grape grower, I get asked with some regularity. And the one interesting factor to consider, obviously, the warming may go on for a long time, but Napa could become considerably warmer and drier and still be a very viable grape growing region, right? If you think of the Mediterranean, you think of some of these pockets, very dry, arid islands where they're still producing beautiful, crisp white wines and delicious and more succulent reds. And so I think from the winemaker's perspective, it is not likely anytime soon anyhow, that we would move, the climate would change as such that we wouldn't be able to grow really premium wine grapes, frankly. And the coast, we're more likely to become like the Central Coast before we're likely to become the Mediterranean islands that I referred to. And they do pretty darn well down there too, right? So I think there's a pretty long window before our aglands aren't valuable from the standpoint of growing wine grapes. That's my humble perspective right now.
I think the challenge for the Republican Party now is this: for the last several years, it has been a party essentially supportive of whatever the president and his administration.
Whoever's got TV on in the background, please mute yourself.
Of course, without power in the
Oh, I wonder if
executive branch,
that's me.
without power in either branch of Congress.
Turn that
So I
off
think the
for a
Republican
minute.
Party has to return to the
Okay, now you can turn it on again. I had my,
Thank you. Do you want to speak?
appeal with the passage of time, with space from the presidency and everything that we've seen. I think.
Okay, next question. Sandy, you will need to unmute yourself.
All right, so let's go to Sharon Macklin. Sharon?
Go ahead, Sharon.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I'm part of the group that Joelle Gallagher mentioned earlier, the Napa Housing Coalition. We've been in existence probably 4 or 5 years, and we've become very successful at working at a city level with the Planning Commission and the council in encouraging and oftentimes changing developers' commitment to affordable housing. We aren't always successful, but sometimes we get a few more units or even some new units built. So one of the things you mentioned, Professor, is infill. In the city of Napa, there's a tremendous opportunity, not just for infill, but the state, the city, the county all has land that could be used for housing. Not all of it, but they could consolidate some of their, what they're using the land for right now. So the Housing Coalition has advocated, continues to advocate for this kind of an issue. But one of the things that we don't have is we don't have support from a wider range of entities. And since the Jack L. Davies Fund is interested in affordable housing, I would encourage them to consider becoming an advocate for affordable housing by joining the Napa Housing Coalition. And I don't know if other organizations such as this that you have experience, Professor, with in other areas with groups such as ours uniting with land use owners to advocate for housing, but I'd certainly like to hear about it if there has been.
Again, the example that I mentioned earlier, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, I think is a good model. Even though that's at the state level, I think it could be replicated at a county level as well. And again, having a broad coalition of advocates for affordable housing together with advocates for agricultural land preservation, I think is very attractive and really gets to the heart of the planning challenges and the growth management challenges that are facing the county. So I'm very impressed with the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Sharon. Our board will discuss how we want to engage in the housing discussions in the future. The Jack Davies Fund exists for education and research about land preservation. But I think you raise an important question of how active we could or should be as an organization in collaborating and advocating for housing. So we have a board meeting next week to digest what we're hearing and decide, where we want to put our energies. Next question. Tony Norris has a comment about the open space district and the land trust having conservation easements on each other's lands for better protection. Tony, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Tony seems to have left the meeting.
Okay. How about Judy? Is Judy still with us? Judy Myers?
Yes. Judy, you're free to speak.
Unmute. Yeah, just a quick question. If there's any experience with dealing with hotels coming into communities where they are going to be bringing in a lot of employees who are going to need housing. And I noticed you had said you did not think that inclusionary zoning should be viewed as a panacea, but what about requiring hotel developers to provide, to make them have to provide inclusionary, some kind of workforce housing?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you can do that through something called a developer's agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically a negotiated agreement by, let's say the city and the hotel developer to say, okay, we'll give you, approval for your hotel if you provide a certain, amount of housing for your workers. You certainly could do that.
Thank you.
I want to apologize that I didn't allow Anthony. He's listed as Anthony Norris, not Tony. So Tony, you are free to speak. Please unmute yourself if you can on your phone. I'm asking him to unmute. He may not be able to. Oh, there he goes.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, it was just an observation, but just recently, as an example, the Napa Land Trust had recorded a conservation easement over our district, Spanish Valley property up off of Purdue Creek, northwest of Lake Berryessa. And another example where we've recorded a conservation easement over their property is in the Linda Falls property just southeast of, southwest of Angwin. And so it's something that we want to continue doing. It just ensures that one of us, if the other ceases to exist, we can continue with protection for the property.
Thank you for that comment, Tony. You're absolutely right. And I'm also glad to be corrected on the fact that there is a cooperative agreement between the Parks District and the Land Trust of Napa County. So the example that you point out does give extra protection for that land. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to skip Barry since he had one question already and go to Grania.
Go ahead, Grania.
Oh, I think she might have left. I saw her a minute ago.
She's muted.
Grania, are you able to unmute yourself?
It's possible she stepped away. Shall we do another one until she comes back, perhaps?
Cass Walker.
Go ahead, you're free to speak.
Hi, I'm just really appreciative of your presentation and your report, and that you are looking at housing and how it relates to open space and preservation. And I'm just hoping that you will keep us all informed as you decide on next steps. Many of us are working on some collaborative housing efforts, part of the Napa Housing Coalition, the Gasser Foundation, and others. And it would just be nice to sort of broaden our reach and work with everyone. So more of a comment than a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. Howard Siegel had a question, but I think he's left, and we haven't. Oh, Grania looks like she's unmuted. Grania, you want to ask your question?
I think it's already been answered. It was really the same question about particular, like hotels contributing to funding for affordable housing.
Well, I think we all know that excellent example of the Bardizona Hotel years ago when they built, and they had property behind the hotel that was developed for workforce housing. I think the question of the jobs and housing balance and contributions of generators of employment is a question ripe for the dialogue with the community and the countywide policy discussions. So thank you for raising that. We're losing people and it's 6:45, so I think it's a perfect time to wrap up. Thank you so much for the dialogue and the questions and the interest. We do have a slide of potential next steps. And as we heard, number 5 is already completed. And that leaves 4, there are many more ideas in this report. We're not tied to any of these ideas, but these seem to have a lot of merit and examples of success in other parts of our nation. So as I said, we will have a board meeting, the JLD funds, 8 or 9 board members next week, and discuss how much we have in the world of time and resources to contribute to generating the enthusiasm and the forum for discussing these issues. With COVID and the wildfire recovery issues on the county's plate, I know they are stretched to the limit, but I do know that many of the supervisors are certainly advocates of countywide discussions and collaborations, and have had a housing task force which represented all interest in the county, public, private, the 5 cities and the county in the past. I would encourage that to happen again when there's bandwidth to do that. Hugh, do you want to wrap up the final comments? And thank you for all of you, and to Tom for his presentation and his work on the report. Are you able, he might not be able to unmute himself.
Yes, he can.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Waco. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Tom, very much for the work that you've done to be able to really, I think, help our community open its eyes a little bit to the range of options that are out there. It was great to hear such cooperative spirit with the long-term view in mind. I think that's as farmers, as winemakers, we're kind of geared that way, and so it was a good moment, I think, this evening to feel that long-term spirit and appreciation for our community. We have our challenges, but we have opportunities as well. So big time thanks to everyone. Tom, fantastic presentation. We'll value the report that you prepared for many, many years. And thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you, everyone. Be well and stay safe out there.